When you study the gospel biographies to try to understand how Jesus stewarded his time, one glaring truth jumps off the pages. Jesus was crazy purposeful. In the words of the great Dorothy Sayers, quote, "Under all his gentleness, there is a purpose harder than steel," end quote. Nobody in Jerusalem had more things competing for his attention, and yet Jesus always seemed to be able to discern the essential from the noise. No passage of Scripture illustrates this better than Mark 1, verses 29 through 38. After driving out some evil spirits at the synagogue, Jesus healed Peter's mother-in-law and a bunch of her neighbors. Understandably, the town's residents wanted more of Jesus the next day. But Jesus said no. Why? Because he had already committed his time to a bigger yes. In response to the people's request for more of his time, Jesus said, quote, "Let us go somewhere else to the nearby villages so I can preach there also. That is why I have come," end quote. See Mark 1:38. Jesus understood his purpose, and that allowed him to take the long list of things he could do and prioritize it down to the things he knew he should do to finish the work the Father gave him to do. See John 17:4. And with his work prioritized, Jesus focused relentlessly. Pastor Kevin DeYoung says that, quote, "Jesus knew the difference between urgent and important. He understood that all the good things he could do were not necessarily the things he ought to do. If Jesus had to live with human limitations, we'd be foolish to think we don't. The people on this planet who end up doing nothing are those who never realized they couldn't do everything," end quote. Man, that's good. Yet again, Jesus' example leads us to a timeless principle for redeeming our time today. Here it is. Principle number 4, prioritize your yeses. To redeem our time in the model of our Redeemer, we must decide what matters most and allow those choices to prioritize our commitments. But let's face it, this is easier said than done. We all have so many things on our to-do lists. How do we decide what matters most? One way is by setting bigger goals for our lives and work. I recorded a quick video to unpack this idea further and outline 5 reasons why Christ followers ought to be setting the most epic goals in the world. You can find a link to that video in the text version of today's devotional right here in the YouVersion Bible app.
After Jesus left the synagogue with James and John, they went to Simon and Andrew's home. Now Simon's mother-in-law was sick in bed with a high fever. They told Jesus about her right away. So he went to her bedside, took her by the hand, and helped her sit up. Then the fever left her, and she prepared a meal for them. That evening after sunset, many sick and demon-possessed people were brought to Jesus. The whole town gathered at the door to watch. So Jesus healed many people who were sick with various diseases, and he cast out many demons. But because the demons knew who he was, he did not allow them to speak. Jesus preaches in Galilee. Before daybreak the next morning, Jesus got up and went out to an isolated place to pray. Later, Simon and the others went out to find him. When they found him, they said, "Everyone is looking for you." But Jesus replied, "We must go on to other towns as well, and I will preach to them too. That is why I came." As Jesus and the disciples continued on their way to Jerusalem, they came to a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. Her sister Mary sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what he taught. But Martha was distracted by the big dinner she was preparing. She came to Jesus and said,
"Lord, doesn't it seem unfair to you that my sister just sits here while I do all the work? Tell her to come and help me."
But the Lord said to her, "My dear Martha, you are worried and upset over all these details. There is only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary has discovered it, and it will not be taken away from her. As the time drew near for him to ascend to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. He sent messengers ahead to a Samaritan village to prepare for his arrival. "I brought glory to you here on earth by completing the work you gave me to do,"